the naval force that's going to be stationed in the Mediterranean, how they're going to assist?
Great. So we've been tasked to put together an operation, a NATO operation, using NATO forces in NATO air, land, and sea space. In the Aegean is the primary objective area. We have a 5-ship flotilla that has already moved into the area and assumed the mission. And the mission essentially is to do surveillance and gather information that can be shared then with the authorities in Turkey and Greece, primarily through their coast guards, so that they can take any action that is required. This is a complicated piece of sea space, and the nations are challenged out in that broad sea space to be able to do this information gathering. And so our ships will do that and share that not only with these Coast Guard elements, but with the EU Frontex organization and their small operation in the area.
Okay. And the other question I have for you, sir, is we talked a little bit with General Goretz about the ERI coming up. Now for NATO, you have the enhanced forward presence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. So enhanced forward presence and ERI, we need to keep those separate. They are sort of connected, but they are not. So enhanced forward presence is a NATO concept that the defense ministers have tasked the SACEUR through his organization, the ACO, to look at what should our presence look like in the future. What size and type of forces, how they're constructed, are they rotational, are they persistent, etc. And so we shouldn't now prejudge any of the conclusions that may be brought out in the planning, but we are tasked to do this planning, deliver it for review so that hopefully a decision can be made by the Warsaw Summit, and we'll do that. Now, as to the ERI, which is a U.S. bilateral contribution to our European allies, this is much like the first two ERIs, will allow us to work across several types of improvements and enhancements we want to make here to our infrastructure, to our exercises, to our rotational forces, to our pre-positioned equipment forward, and we'll look at this across all the services, Navy, Air Force, and Army. But this ERI is going to be focused a little more on the Army. But again, it will allow us to better position ourselves, to be in position when needed to be, and to rapidly reinforce when we need to rapidly reinforce.
Thank you. Prime Minister Medvedev this morning said that the world had slid into a new Cold War. Does NATO feel like you have entered a Cold War, and what does this statement mean for the conflict with Russia over Ukraine?
Certainly, Minister Medvedev is entitled to his opinion. We don't look at what is happening as a Cold War, and no one in NATO wants to return to a Cold War. We've talked specifically about that. You have heard me say before, you have heard the Secretary General say before, and you've heard multiple ministers in foreign affairs, defense, and chiefs of defense all say the same thing. NATO is a defensive alliance. We are about the collective defense of our allies. Our actions are defensive, and they are proportionate in size and capability. And we are taking those actions because we have seen a nation to the east that for 2 decades we were trying to make a partner of this nation. And this nation has recently demonstrated that it does not want to be a partner. It invaded the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea, and it continues to occupy it today. So Russia used force to change an internationally recognized border. Some months later, they crossed the internationally recognized border of Ukraine and entered into the Donbass, and they remain there today. And even more recently, you saw they went into Georgia and South Ossetia, moved the lines yet again in South Ossetia, and moved the line over the top of a transmission of energy line. So we have a nation that has once again put on the table that it will use force to change internationally recognized borders. And for that, NATO is taking the appropriate defensive measures that it needs to take. But no one wants a new Cold War, and that is not what we in NATO see ourselves headed towards.
And what will be the target of this mission? I mean, will NATO gather information in Syria, so in the soil, in the territories of Syria, or in Turkey, to stop these people smugglers?
So the first of all, what was talked about and worked out between Germany and the Greeks and the Turkish officers or the representatives early was this concern about the lines and the difference in the lines. And what we have agreed is that Turkish ships will not patrol in Greek waters, Greek ships will not patrol in Turkish waters, and that's why we have other nations in the maritime group to allow us to get the density that we need in the objective area. And in fact, as the Turkish ships stay in their territorial waters, they will prove a good liaison with the Turkish Coast Guard, which again is the objective here, to hand off the information that is gathered to the Turkish Coast Guard and the Greek Coast Guard, and also shared, and I didn't mention this before, but we're directed to work with and share this information with Frontex, the EU organization and operation. And I think that's a very good development. It's one of the first times that we have been directed to make contact with and cooperate with the EU in this manner. Your answer on ISR. The mission in the Aegean received a lot of attention and definition because it had to be worked out between two allies who, as you noted, have some differences in that space. The mission along the border has not been well defined yet. We have the guidance from the NAC, from the defense ministers. We are now going to go off and put together a concept of operations and forward it back up to them for concern. So it's too early really to describe the questions that you're talking about.
My name is Alexander Pausch. I'm a political editor with the German newspaper Der Neue Tag, which is published around Grafenwöhr training area. My question goes to the European Reassurance Initiative. As we all know, soldiers cannot get enough assets.